Hello and welcome back to another Seedpod podcast. We are on episode number 7.
Yes, we are.
And today we are dealing with the question of pain and suffering.
Oh, that gets asked a lot. How in the world can
there be suffering? And well, so we're going to come at this probably from a little different angle, but we do want to address the elephant in the room. And the question is always, how can a loving God? All right, we're not going to be looking at the what is the
apologetic?
The apologetic. That's the word. It was in my
I'm here for you.
The apologetic of proving pain and suffering and the existence of God. This podcast is going to be more for the Christian who's going through suffering and what the Bible has for us.
Practical aspects of it.
But we don't want to leave that question at least out there.
Because the elephant is in the room.
Yeah. So how can a loving God allow pain and suffering? And one of the things, the first answer is, if you go all the way back to the beginning, God did not create the world with pain and suffering.
No.
Even the animals, the garden itself, and mankind, all, from what we understand, had a relatively peaceful existence and would have had a peaceful existence.
As far as we know.
And then sin came into the world and threw off the balance. And so we have to ask the question, why would God allow these things to happen? Well, why do we allow sin? I mean, all those same questions can be asked. And I think when we get to Job, Job going through pain and suffering, all that he went through, at the end of the day, what does God tell him?
I know stuff you don't know. Trust me, I got this covered. And Job says, you know what? I'm not going to have a lot to say. Okay.
Yeah. And so we always try to, with our limited knowledge and understanding, try to poke the bear at God and try to expose the why of what he does. And there are times where God will explain, this is why.
That's true.
This is why I've done this.
But other times it's a trust me thing.
It's a trust me thing.
And there's a basis for trusting.
There is a basis for trusting. And especially when we get to those who actually trust God, believe in God, have faith in God, there's even more of a reason to trust God.
And it's not like he hasn't invested something in the project. There is the cross, after all.
Absolutely. And that gets to another question people ask, a statement. If I were God, I would have done X, Y, Z.
Yeah. First of all, they're not.
Yeah.
Secondly, if they were, they don't have a clue what they do.
Yeah. And here's always my response. If you were God and you had the same knowledge and understanding, because once again, one of the things about being God, he has to be all-knowing.
He works in keeping with his nature.
Yeah. And if you were all-knowing, the same all-knowing that the God of the Bible is all-knowing, then you would have done the same thing.
There wouldn't be any other choice because you know everything and you do what's keeping with knowing everything.
Yeah. And so there is a difference between, even if God told us having the knowledge and us understanding that knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We don't have, it's beyond our pay grade, if you will.
Yeah. Well, it's like a parent telling a child, do not do this. And I have a teenage daughter.
So you do.
Right? So there's a lot of things that my teenage daughter has not experienced in life, and therefore she is ignorant of.
She may think that you're crazy.
Yes, she does.
That doesn't mean you're not.
But we have this working relationship, and so far it's good. She's 14, almost 15, where I say, you may not understand why what I'm telling you matters to you now, or you may think you may even think it's foolish. You may even think it's the complete opposite of what should actually be being done.
When I get to be a parent,
And I've made the same statement.
Yes, as have I.
But she has learned through trial and error that when she listens to me, things go well for her. And when she decides to go her own way,
not so
though
much.
she thought it was the right one.
From her perspective, it seemed that way.
Yeah, and you almost can't fault her. That's actually the role of parents.
I know.
Is to be that voice of reason.
In the midst of the troubling times of adolescence.
And we need to learn to take that on a cosmic scale.
Yes.
And say that God knows all things, and our knowledge compared to what God knows and what we know, compared to what Katrina, my daughter knows and I know, is so vastly different. And if I'm expecting my daughter, or you expect your daughter or your son to trust you with only 10, maybe 15 years away from knowledge, imagine a being that's been around forever infinite God, and
Knows everything.
us who've been around,
Who are we?
30 years in existence. We get so pretentious sometimes.
We do. Oh, we know, everybody knows, that there are things that happen in life that at some point we realize, I would have thought,
Yeah.
but now I see this. That's part of our limited experience. Imagine on a cosmic scale, with God intervening into it to tell us things that we would never actually get to the point of understanding, but He can understand for us, and that's a lot of what faith is about.
Yeah. What does Deuteronomy say? The secret things
belong to God,
but the things which are revealed,
they're ours. We
They're
got to
ours.
deal with them.
So this is not an excuse not to deal with the question.
No,
But our purpose for this specific podcast isn't necessarily to deal with that question, but we want you to know that question's out there. We want to let you know that there are answers. I think there are good answers.
oh, I think so too.
But ultimately, we got to get back to, and when Job was questioning God, he finally got to, he didn't question God for a while. He defended God even. Defended himself, defended God.
Then he got over it.
And then he kind of got to the place where he's like, okay, God, what is this about? And Elihu comes, and I just want to make this verse.
I love him.
Where it says in chapter 34 and verse 5, and this is what he says about what Job has been doing. For Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right.
Oh my.
And so and basically what Elihu is saying is Job has now got to the point where instead of analyzing his own life, maybe there is something wrong with me. He is now saying, well, maybe there is something wrong with God.
On a pretentious scale, that's
Yeah.
like up at the top.
Yeah, maybe there's something wrong with God's plan or His knowledge. Maybe there's a flaw
I caught him.
in His design.
Yeah.
And I think we need to steer away from, with our limited knowledge, trying to say that we understand pain and suffering. We may not like pain and suffering. Nobody likes it. God doesn't even like it.
He doesn't even like it.
He does not desire, He doesn't even desire, at Hebrews 10, He doesn't desire the sacrifice of animals.
No.
Those are His creatures just as much as us. He doesn't like that they have to die. And I love, just to kind of close the beginning, Romans 8 talks about this idea that even the creation itself longs to be set free from the curse that it was put under as well.
As a result of sin, a consequence of sin. Do you like free will?
I love free will.
So do I. You know what I think? The people that are listening, I think they like it too.
Yeah.
But you know what? If you get free will, you got to go with the things that go with it.
So there's a statement that Uncle Ben makes of Spider-Man. I think everybody knows it. With great power comes great responsibility. And the benefits of free will, I think, are so, if you were to do a scale, the benefits of free will are so vast that nobody would not choose it.
Right.
But also the potential of wrong that comes within that great responsibility that we're given of free will means we also can choose the opposite.
Yeah, the potential for good is the potential for bad. They balance each other out in a sense because both of them have to be there as options.
Yeah, and getting back to my teenage daughter, if I asked her, so you don't do anything wrong ever, so you never even get in trouble, do you want me to follow you along and make every decision for you?
Of course not.
What do you think she would say?
I know how that's going to go. Same as if we had the same question put to us.
But let's say I did that. What would she learn?
Nothing, and at the end of the day, we're talking about being a robot.
Yeah.
Who really wants to be a robot?
And you don't.
You don't.
You don't. And so that gets us into, I'm going to start with a verse that I think will help set this discussion going. Okay. James 1. All right, it was brought up in our devotional last night by Kirk Sessions, good devotional. And here's what James has to say. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds.
Whoa, and that hits you, doesn't it?
Yeah, because what do you mean by joy in this discussion?
Yeah.
And that's one, again, why word studies are so bad.
Yeah,
joy does not always mean, we're not talking about when someone's punching you in the face, you go,
thank you.
keep punching me in the face. But there is a joy in knowing that there is something that this trial is doing for you as a person and as an individual.
Paul, in Colossians 1:24 beginning, talks about his joy, if you will, that he can share in the sufferings of Christ.
Yeah.
And he can experience something like what Jesus has experienced for him. He can have a better relationship and understanding because of that. And that fulfills him in some ways that were useful to him.
Yeah. Paul even says, well, I'm going to keep reading James. We'll get to Paul in a second. He says, for knowing that the testing your faith produces steadfastness. And, I had a sermon yesterday, and one of the things, the comparison is, weight training and physical training to spirituality.
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. Everyone knows that.
No, yeah.
Right? But yet we don't like the reality of it. Because I'm telling you, in the middle of my workout, me and Ashley do a lot of HIIT trainings, which is high intensity interval training. Man, it is the worst. It is absolutely the worst. And there are so many times I want to give up.
You have
Why am I
second
going
thoughts,
through
don't
this?
you? Maybe third or fourth.
But you know what? Months of that, I'm down 50 pounds. I am feeling better than I ever felt, more flexible.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it.
Okay.
It was worth it. And I'm going to tell you, the pain that I've gone through in my life, the suffering that I've gone through in my life has made me a more compassionate, has made me a more relatable, has made me a more, let's not judge everything on the outset. It has helped me.
Yes. And there would be no way to just take a course in your living room and say, oh, okay, I've got that now. No, you have to experience it.
How many books do you think on marriage do people read before they get married?
0.
Well, 0. But let's say let's say they read them all.
They read them all.
Let's
Is
just
it going to
say
be
for a
like
moment,
that when they get married?
When they get married, all of a sudden that first fight happens. Where do all those books go?
Or like raising children. Before I had children, I really knew how to raise children. Then all of a sudden, I didn't know so much anymore. But then I came to know a whole lot more after the experience.
Yeah, and I think, but we live in this society where we have these get-rich-quick schemes.
Oh, yeah.
We have the lose weight quick, take this pill.
Yeah, you're good.
There's never, I'm telling you, there's not a pill.
No, there's not. If there were, everybody would be taking it, right?
How do you gain knowledge? Endless nights.
The knowledge pill. No. A lot of it's experience.
Life is experience. And
my brother is an automobile mechanic, recently retired. My dad was an automobile mechanic. In some high school class we learned the parts of an automobile. And so I could come home and specifically name parts of an automobile that my brother could name. But my brother could work on a car and I couldn't.
Yeah.
Because he was one of those take it apart, put it back together guys.
Useful knowledge. Well, and that gets back to the fact that I was talking to my dad's mechanic one time, and he goes, I can't find good help because all the people who keep putting in applications are these people who just came out of school. He goes, what I'm looking for is the redneck who worked with his dad and grandfather on every machine in the world, and it doesn't matter, some people know how to work on this car or this type of car.
Yes.
But what about, they just know engines. They know how engines work. It don't matter if it's a tractor engine, a car engine.
That's my dad. He understood the mechanics of the thing.
Yeah, and so kind of getting, I know let's hone it back in, but when it comes back to pain and suffering,
experience.
It comes to experience. And the world has it. It's out there. Everyone experiences it. I mean, even in childbirth, you come into this world in suffering. Crying. But the crying actually, it shows that there's life. If there's no crying at childbirth,
you want your child to cry.
You want it to cry. It helps build their lungs right at the beginning. This screaming that you want, please stop screaming, is building
the air in there. You gotta get these lungs moving.
So it's definitely useful for us, and that's what James says. He says, that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, meaning, you ever been in a doctor's office?
Well, yes, I have.
And your appointment is at what time?
It's not when you go in.
It's not when you go in. I don't care how many times you go to a doctor. If they say it's at 10, you're not getting in until 10:30.
Forget about it.
But that's not the kind of patience that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a patience where you're sitting around and waiting patience. No, this is a trial. This is a testing. And what it does is when life hits you, the more life hits you, the more things stop affecting you so much. Everybody goes to a doctor's office now knowing that you need to add another 30 minutes.
It's just, get you a magazine or your device.
You learn that by experience.
Yes.
And so that's exactly what James is saying. He says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness, this long suffering, have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
And there is no other way to get that.
Interestingly enough, when people make the argument, why did God create it this way? What they really want is they want to be made complete and perfect without having to go through what it takes to be.
Yeah. Give me what I can only get that way without having to get it that way.
Yeah, we were talking right before we started recording, and you were talking about a child. If we could keep a child innocent,
yes,
what would we do? What would we pay if we could keep the innocence of our child?
Yes, because we know what's going to happen. It's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt them. And yet, to function as an adult, you have to go through that.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. Would you rather deal with a innocent baby child and have to relate and talk with and work with, or would you rather have to work with, talk with, and relate somebody who's gone through life and who knows life, who's matured, and they know how to use wisdom? Because
children are not wise.
Though children are innocent, man, that innocence takes them in the wrong direction a lot of times.
Yeah, you see a little bit. Every once in a while, I watch these little things that are available online about kids being kids and little babies and how sweet and how innocent. And how it just makes you smile. But you know, they can't stay that way forever.
No, they can't. Romans 5 has another way of saying that I think works well in this discussion. And here's how Paul says. He says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have attained access by faith into this grace, in which we stand, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Not only that, here we go, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope. Hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has poured into our hearts the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. For while we were weak, at the right time, Christ, died or literally suffered for the ungodly.
Yes.
So there's a dual nature to this, why I brought this verse up. One, people always say, why would God create pain and suffering? And I would respond with, why didn't he kill us all at the beginning?
Which, if you take it strictly justice, in a pure, perfect, holy God, why put up with us?
Actually, the fact that we're still living shows the grace of God,
exactly,
not the wickedness of God. And secondly, Jesus, God himself, inserted himself into that suffering to take on our suffering. The
big solution.
The price of our sin. We don't even have to pay for the price of our own sin if we are covered by the blood of Jesus.
God's taken it all.
So He's not only asked us to go through this life in pain and suffering, he's willing to go through it with us. And as Paul said, this produces character, and this character produces hope. How can you have hope in something when you never have learned what trust means?
And that's the paradox of it all. You can't. You absolutely can't. I look at I would not want to go back through my life again, but I am glad I have gone through it.
Yeah. I think about high school.
High school.
I learned so many social awkward. I don't know what to even say.
Just think about dating. Getting into that era is like, man, talk about awkward.
I told Ashley that if she ever leaves me first, I'm just going to follow behind her.
You're never going away.
Yeah. But the fact of trying to date again makes me want to throw up.
Oh, man.
It's
I'm
awkward.
telling you, it was way awkward.
I mean, it was exciting.
Well, yeah, there's that.
But I'm past the exciting.
But you're glad to get past that.
I'm glad I have the relationship I have with my wife. And ultimately, when it comes to suffering, did it sting to go through it? Yes. Did you learn something?
Yes.
Did it help you grow?
Yes.
Now, we got to talk about the other side.
The flip.
Does everybody allow suffering to help them?
Not at all. Because there's free will again. You can decide what you're going to do with the adversity that comes into your life. So it can make or break you.
Yeah. So here's the interesting aspect of it. those who go through suffering, let's say it's the same suffering. Let's say person A and person B go through the same event. Person A turns out to be a stellar person because of it. Person B turns out to be, makes excuses.
Yeah, blames everybody else, blames God.
Now, person A ought to be able to look at person B and go, I understand why you feel the way you feel.
It's natural to feel that way.
But you don't have to allow it.
Yeah, you can choose to profit from it. That doesn't mean it's good of itself,
Yeah.
but you can choose to have it bring positive results.
Yeah. And ultimately, every book that I've ever read on any of this stuff, they never, the people who are accusing the Christians and accusing God of evil, pain, and suffering, never once do I hear them talk about the benefits of it. Yet every book out there, every psychology book, every social psychology book, talks about the pressure of going through, peer pressure and overcoming it. If there wasn't an overcoming, if there wasn't a goal, an obstacle, something in our way to overcome and to be better, then we would just be worthless people.
Oh, that's exactly right.
We would be worthless people, and yet we don't always understand why.
It's true.
Now, talking to God's people, not only is there just regular pain and suffering in the world, and these atheists who want to accuse God of, he's even put on his own people a higher level of pain and suffering. That once you join the kingdom of God, what does Jesus say?
More's coming at you.
More will come. So you may think we're crazy for believing in God who allows pain and suffering. Wait until you figure out that
we're even more crazy than that.
We join something, and that's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5. He says, whether I become insane for the sake of Christ, or I look like I'm insane, no matter what I have to go through, he says in 2 Corinthians 4 that the pain and the trials of this life do not compare to the weight of glory.
That's right. The Job thing again. At the end of the day, Job starts getting kind of snarky with God.
Yeah.
And from his point of view, I can kind of understand why he does that. It really looks like it's grossly unfair. So God comes to him, and Job suddenly quiets down. But God says, I got some questions for you. And he asks him all kind of things that Job has no clue what the answer is, which is basically God saying, look, I know all kind of things you don't know. I'll let you know enough about me to trust me that I know what I'm doing, but I know stuff you don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do things, make decisions about things, and see things differently from you.
Yeah. Peter, Peter bringing him into discussion in 1 Peter chapter 1 and going back to this. Once again, we don't see it, but Peter basically says that Jesus, who is not dead, we have a living hope, which brings you back to Jesus died and suffered on the cross.
More than we can ever comprehend, and not just physical at all, but he's bearing the guilt of the sin of every human being that's ever going to live. We can't even touch understanding what that's like.
And so when we are in him, no matter what suffering we go through, we know that ultimately we're paying this suffering, we'll say, for the general sin into the world, but Jesus took on our specific sin.
Yes.
And therefore we can have hope. And therefore, he says, our suffering can purify us like gold is purified by fire. And then he says, you can have a joy that is inexpressible.
And this world's not the end of the story.
It's not the end of the story, or at least the way the world is right now.
Exactly.
God plans to redeem all things to himself. And when he does that,
the former things will have passed away.
The former things will have passed away. But I want to read, I think, reading Isaiah 43 or 53 in this discussion, when we're dealing with pain and suffering, we need to talk about what Jesus willingly allowed himself to go through. And, you bring in discussions like John chapter 1, where he came to his own and his own did not accept him. I mean, Jesus is coming to people who ought to be welcoming him.
Exactly.
Ought to be thanking him.
But they crucify him.
And they yell it. They scream it. And Peter, when he sees it, denies Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus is left alone. You want to talk about loneliness? Loneliness to me is more suffering than I got a boo-boo on my knee.
Oh yeah, a little bit more.
The mental suffering that we can go through depression and anxiety and all those things. And yet, even in depression and anxiety, like why is it in the world? I think one of the reasons why there's so much anxiety in the world is when people have uncertainty. And exactly what Paul says in Romans chapter 5 is what suffering does is it should allow the uncertainty to leave us, and it leaves us with
Look to
hope.
the solution, into the hope. No, our world, I was observing the other day in a class that every study that people take shows that people, especially in our culture, are lonely.
Yeah.
And they take their loneliness out by raging against first one thing and then another. That's not the cure for loneliness. That just exacerbates it.
You know, and speaking of loneliness, one of the reasons why I believe God uses images as us being a temple, or us being a house, or us being a part of his body, us being members of his body. If we have God, we're never alone.
Right.
And the solution to loneliness, let's say you don't get along with your family, you don't get along with your friends, the church community ought to be a place because, as Peter would say, we have like and precious faith.
Yes.
That we become so much part of a family that you're never alone. He's built us a community where we can thrive, where we can learn to love, we can learn to encourage, we can learn to confess our sins, all these things ought to be going on. And the church, Jesus being the body, is the ultimate solution to pain and suffering.
It's not just to come sit on a pew on Sunday at all. It's more than that.
And
it's that family aspect.
And it's right here in front of people. And rather than accept it and embrace it, what they want to do is blame God for having to even create this plan in the first place. You may not understand why this is necessary.
It actually works, though.
But it works, and I believe that it works better because take the Jews. They kind of become our archetype in a sense of why being born into a religious group doesn't work.
Yeah.
The Jews were born into the people of God.
They have no choice.
They have no choice. And what did they do with it?
Well,
they didn't really even want it.
No, they get nasty about it.
Yeah. So a better solution is finding people who actually desire it and want it, because that's the thing about free will. You have to want it and desire it.
Free will. There it is again.
And a lot of times, I don't want to go so far. When we have the free will discussion, people think about, well, what about the sovereignty of God? God is still in control of all things.
If God decides that he wants free will to be in the system, surely he has the sovereignty to make that decision.
And our free will never override God's plan.
Oh, it's not, oh no, they've taken over, I can't stand it. No, he's in control.
And it's interesting, even if you try to choose to get out of God's plan, you cannot
Good luck
get out
with that.
Because a part of the plan is one day that all those who are outside of Christ, unfortunately, who have not allowed pain and suffering to see a need for God and a desire for God and a desire for grace and mercy that he has offered freely, wants to give it to all men at his own expense, paid the price, people would still rather do it their own way. And you will,
Frank Sinatra lives.
You will suffer the consequences of being your own God.
So, the only reasonable choice, go with the system as it is. The part you can't understand, okay, God's got it covered. And take advantage of the opportunities that come our way. Yes, there'll be sadness, sometimes perhaps excruciatingly so. But fortunately, that's not the end of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to read Isaiah 53, and I think that's a good place to end.
Okay, let's do that.
I'm going to start in verse 3. He, being obviously a prophecy of Jesus, we know that. He was he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs, carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and all the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I would ask this question. What's fair about Jesus having to come because of our sin, our recklessness, and our evil desires and thoughts and actions?
He didn't do it.
For a truly innocent man to suffer on our behalf.
And God's taking that on.
What's fair about that?
Nothing.
So the question is reversed on you. And one, this is more powerful, and you may not like the system, but God went through it with us, and He gave us a plan. And so, I don't really give a whole lot of invitations all that often in the sense of the way we normally do it. But if you are listening to this, and maybe life has thrown you a couple curveballs, maybe you're in the midst of one right now.
Yeah, it happens.
I want to let you know that Jesus has offered His own body, His own blood, so that you may have the forgiveness of sins.
Yes.
And you may not see it now or feel it now or know it now, but trust us who are on the other side, the weight that is lifted when you fully embrace that. You take God at His word, though not fully understanding it.
You're right.
And you actually, as Peter says in 1 Peter 5, cast all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. And you truly do that. You want to talk about seeing the world in a new light, rather than trying to find the blame for God.
Right.
You repent and you fall on your knees and you appreciate.
No, we're not saying there's not going to be pain and suffering. In fact, that's what we're saying. There is. And it can be horrible.
Yeah.
But there are ways of dealing with it. The fact that we have a free will-based system means those things are going to be happening. Yet, God's got that part of it covered. Not that it doesn't hurt, not that it isn't excruciating at times, but that's not the end of it.
And there is a hope for a place for all those who accept Jesus here through the pain and suffering, that one day He's going to remove all of that so that we may live eternally.
Check it out.
In peace.
Look into it.
Ask questions. We love you.
We do.
God bless.
Bye-bye.